السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وقل ربي زدني علما. Alhamdulillah. First of all, welcome, marhaban to everybody. And I also want to thank personally the Science Center from the Baladiya of Konya, especially Ustad Ali. I don't want to say your last name because I can't pronounce so I don't want to. But Ustad Ali, who was with us last year, and he's become the director here. And so they were kind enough to allow us to use this facility, which is a very high-tech. This was a huge multi-million-dollar center, and it's the Turkish community and the government's commitment to really restoring to our tradition the importance of science. A lot of the extraordinary developments that happened historically in science were from the Muslims, and at a certain point that aspect of worldly knowledge was abandoned to a large degree. They kept up astronomy till very late, but by and large you did not see the types of advancements that you had in that early period. And because of that, especially in the military area, the Europeans, who benefited greatly from the Muslim knowledge. In fact, I think it's arguable that the hadith about one of the signs of the end of time is antarid al-amatu rabbataha. I mean, my personal interpretation of that, I haven't seen it from a scholar, but my personal interpretation of that is that the Islamic civilization gave birth to the Western civilization, and the Islamic civilization was a amma civilization. It was a civilization of servitude, but it gave birth to a civilization of hegemony, a civilization of rububiyyah that really took it upon itself to conquer nature, and instead of working with nature to subdue nature. In fact, the metaphor that was used by Francis Bacon, who is really at the root of modern Western civilization. Francis Bacon is probably the single most important person in the change that occurs in Western civilization from a religious society to a secular society. I mean, he really begins that transformation. There are people before him, undeniably, but he's at the root of it when deductive reasoning was supplanted and replaced by inductive reasoning, and the scientific method becomes the only method of knowledge, which is only one aspect of knowledge. And so the Muslims had metaphysics, but they also had physics. And you need both to have a healthy civilization. So it's important. And the nice thing about this country is there is a lot of intellectual activity. And I spent last year, we had an evening one night with several of the Turkish scholars, and I was just really impressed to see them discussing a lot of the ideas in Western philosophy. They were, they'd read Heidegger, Habermas. They knew what postmodernism was. They knew what critical theory was. And I haven't seen that in scholars in other parts of the Muslim world. And those are important for scholars to be aware of, because these are the things that people don't realize that philosophy is at the root of what determines the worldview of civilizations. And so to ignore philosophy is really to ignore the worldview that is dominant in your civilization. And we have a hegemonic civilization that is having very, very negative effects on the environment, It's a belligerent civilization. It's a civilization that manufactures massive amounts of weapons and then spreads those weapons all over the world, and then really partakes in conflicts that happen as a result of those weapons. And so the Muslim civilization was traditionally a service-oriented civilization. It was a civilization that every enterprise involved serving the poor, free hospitals. The Muslims started a lot of the things that we take for granted in some of the more enlightened societies. And I'm talking more, not so much enlightened in terms of religious, but just in terms of social services, like the Northern European countries, like Norway and Iceland and Denmark. Iceland, I think, is probably one of the most intelligent secular societies out there. And they've done amazing things in their social welfare, prohibiting pornography, not on religious grounds, but simply on the common weal. It wasn't a healthy thing for a society. They're also one of the few societies that is truly middle class. And the Prophet ﷺ, even though he chose poverty over wealth, and he had the choice, he did that as a way of solidarity with poor people, which are the majority of people on the planet. But he preferred middle. He preferred the middle, what we would call the middle class. And I'm not talking about middle class in America, which is an extravagant, wealthy class, but middle class in cultures where people have enough. They have their basic needs are met. That's a middle class, when your basic needs are met. I mean, middle class in the West is actually, would be considered a very wealthy class historically. I mean, the houses that a lot of us live in the West, if you go and visit King Abdulaziz's house the 100 years ago, if you visit his palace in Ta'if, which we did a few years back, it's actually far less impressive than most of the middle-class houses I've been in the United States. And that was a king of the Arabian Peninsula. So people today live like kings of the past. So we're here in Turkey, and this is a really difficult time for Muslims. As all of you are very aware, I don't think anybody here is unaware of a lot of the events that have been happening in the Muslim world. There's an incredible amount of suffering going on right down the road. And there's a helplessness, I think, that we all feel. Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman radiyallahu anhu once said that towards the latter days, the Prophet told him that towards the latter days, he said, يُخَيَّرُ الْمَرْءُ بَيْنَ الْعَجْزِ وَالْفُجُورِ, that people would be given a choice of being bad people or being helpless people. And one of the tabi'een said, قَبَّحَ اللَّهُ الْعَجْزِ, may Allah make ugly the helplessness, because these were Arab people, strong people. And Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman said, قَبَّحَكَ اللَّهُ أَنْتَ, may Allah make you ugly. Al-ajzu khayrun min al-fujur. Helplessness is better than profligacy. So the sunnah of helplessness, and our Prophet was helpless in Mecca. He was helpless at Ta'if. There's a sunnah of being helpless. And part of that sunnah is accepting your state. That is your state. It's helplessness. And it's a hard state to accept. But that is the sunnah of helplessness. It's to accept your state and to call on God and to be content with the qadr. Because there's only two views on this planet. One is that we live in an orderly universe. And this doesn't just mean the heavenly orders or the orders of the seasons. The flowers bloom in an orderly manner. Farmers don't plant in winter. Farmers know when to plant because there's an order. If you plant outside of the season of planting, you're not going to harvest the fruit. They know that. And so the nature of God's world is order. And then there's the people that don't believe that this is a chaotic, disorderly planet with no order in it. The chaos and disorder that you see on the planet only comes from the chaos and disorder that's within us, that when we don't align ourselves with heavenly order. That's all it is. It's a manifestation of our own disorder. And that is because of sinfulness. It's as simple as that. If people align themselves with God, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala harmonizes their conditions. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah doesn't change the conditions of a people. مَا بِقَوْمٍ. He doesn't change the conditions of a people until they change what's in themselves. So this is takween and taklif. Amr takwini and amr taklifi. The conditions they're mukawwana, they're outside of the taklif. You can't determine your conditions. You can't determine your conditions. The people in Gaza did not determine their conditions. They were born into those conditions. We didn't determine our conditions. But what we can determine is what's in our nafs. That's where Allah has given us power. We can actually change what's in ourselves. And God says that when you get enough people to do that, He will change your conditions. That's His business. That's not our business. And part of the qalb al-haqa'iq, which is the inversion of realities that happens at the end of time, is that people are preoccupied with things outside of their power and completely unoccupied, completely negligent of things within their power. And so this is a huge problem with the human condition. So the time we're here is a short time. The Quran about ayyam and ma'dudat, about Ramadan, it says that their ma'dudat is what they call jam'u qillah. You know, ayyam is jam'u qillah, that it's awqat, it's jam'u qillah. It's a plural of paucity. It's a few days. And so we're here for a limited amount of time, and we want to make the best of the time that we can and utilize the time, try not to waste our time. We're inefficient by our nature. And Allah's kataba alayna hada shay. I mean, this is something, even our bodies are working at about a 33-34% efficiency rate in terms of the usage of our caloric energy. Allah, that's His sunnah in creation. You know, a car has about a 7 to 10% efficiency rate. 90% of the car's energy is dissipated, it's just wasted. So humans are master time wasters. We're master food wasters. If you see the tonnage of food that's wasted on this planet, it's beyond belief. There was a lot of food wasted tonight. We waste food, we waste money, we waste time. But what we should do is make tawbah and get better and better, inshallah, at trying to utilize the time. Because as it's a diminishing commodity, if you want to use an economic metaphor, wal asri innal insana lafi khusr. By time, man is at loss because it's just dissipating. Life is a concatenant of moments. It's just one moment after the other. Allah, they called Allah, the scholastics in medieval Christianity called God the Nunc-stans. And I think they probably got that from Imam al-Jurjani. In the Ta'rifat, he says that God is al-an ad-da'im, the eternal now. God is in the present tense. And we are always in the present tense, but we're obsessed with the past and the future. We're in a state of khawf, about the future, fear. Everybody's in fear and trepidation. What's going to happen next? And then we have grief over the past. This is the human condition. The Prophet ﷺ sought refuge from these states. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-huzni, right? Min al-hammi min al-hammi wal, والحزن. I seek refuge in you from anxiety about the future and hazan about the past. So he sought refuge in that state, from that state. So we have a short time, try to make the best of the time. People are obviously coming from different places. Some people were already in Turkey, so you have no excuses. But the people that came from other places, it takes a little time to acclimatize. And so utilize the time to get to sleep when you can. And then also, because of the nature of this, it's an intensive. Your mind's going to be stimulated, hopefully, and because of that, you're going to be activated, and that will sometimes make it difficult just to relax. So we have Dr. Yang who's coming to get you guys calmed down. He was here last year. People really liked him. My advice to you is he's a real gem. He's comes out of another tradition, and so be aware of that. He's very respectful of Islam, but be aware of that he's from China and he comes out of a different tradition. But he's a martial arts expert, and he's also a Qigong expert. And Qigong are the exercises that are related. Chinese martial artists do Qigong as exercises for Kung Fu and Tai Chi. Kung Fu is the young man's martial art in China, and Tai Chi is the older man's martial art. But the Qigong are the exercises that they do to strengthen their Qi and their Jing, and they're very useful. He's a really good teacher. He knows them really well, and he's living proof of how effective they are for people that were here last year. Indefatigable energy. He really has incredible energies, and he attributes that to being consistent in that practice. So, and then alhamdulillah, all the teachers are here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the believers, "Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul wa ulil amri minkum," obey Allah and His Messenger, and ulil amri minkum, the people put in charge. So obviously, at the macro level, we have to obey all the laws in this country, respect the state that we're in, and I'm sure everyone will do that. But also, we have to respect the people in authority at the Rihla, and inshallah, none of them would abuse their power. Like the Sahaba, one of the Sahaba was Amir of a group, and he told them to jump into the fire. And they said, we became Muslim to save ourselves from the fire. So when they got back, they told the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "La ta'ati li makhluqin fi ma'asiyat al-khaliq." You don't obey creatures if it means disobeying the Creator. And that's a qaida in our tradition. So you should obey the people. If they ask you not to do something, don't get testy with them. If it seems unreasonable or something like that, maybe go to a superior about it, but don't argue. This isn't a place for argumentation. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, Imam Tirmidhi and others relate, مَا ضَلَّ قَوْمٌ بَعْدَ هُدًى كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا أُوتُوا الْجَدَلِ. People don't go astray after they were given guidance, except that what's replaced, argumentation is the replacement of the guidance. That's a sign that people are astray if they're arguing. And Imam Malik never argued. And if people started arguing in the masjid of the Prophet, he used to get up, shake his rida, his shawl, and say, "Antum harb, you're war," and he would just walk away. Our religion is not a religion of argumentation. Ulama, it's makruh for ulama to debate. It was traditionally considered haram for common people to debate about religion, because you can't. If you don't have knowledge, you shouldn't be discussing fine points of this, that, or the other. So don't argue. You can discuss things. That's important. I was looking at some really intelligent some really intelligent questions. I thought they were from me. I was thinking, oh God. But some really good questions from the Aqidah class. So shows good. So you have a right to ask any question. You have a right to ask any question. Not all answers are satisfying. That's the nature of dunya. There's certain things we just, Allahu wa Rasuluhu a'lam. We don't know why a lot of things happen, but the general principles that we have in our religion give us guidance in any situation. And then the wisdom is determining what's the appropriate guidance for the appropriate situation, which is what our ulama call tahqiq al-manat. And inshallah we'll talk about that. In fact, Imam Al-Ghazali actually is the originator of that concept, which is a very important concept in usul al-fiqh. So I wanted to read, and then I'll just end this. The Prophet ﷺ, Abu Huraira mentions, and this is in the book of Al-Fitan by Nu'aym ibn Hamad, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that, was talking about when the fitan come. And we're living in a time of fitan, and if you don't believe that, I don't know where you are, on the North Pole or something like that. But he said, لا ينجو من شرها إلا من دعا كدعاء الغرق, that no one will be safe from this except those who call the prayer of a drowning man. And that really should be our prayer these days, because the planet is drowning. And if you're not aware of that, again, I don't know where you are. I heard somebody, I was in Istanbul yesterday, and I heard somebody in a table next to me was saying to the other person, oh, it was so amazing, we went out on the Bosphorus and there were all these incredible jellyfish. And that person probably doesn't know, but I actually read a book called Stung, which is about how jellyfish are taking over the ocean. It was one of the most disturbing books I've ever read, written by the leading expert on jellyfish who lives in New Zealand. But he said, لا ينجو من شرها إلا من دعا كدعاء الغرق أسعد أهلها كل تقي خفي إذا ظهر لم يعرف وإن جلس لم يفتقد وأشقى أهلها كل خطيب مسقع أو راكب موضع. He said the happiest people in those days would be pious people who kept their piety to themselves. If they show up somewhere, nobody knows them. If they sit somewhere, nobody's looking for them. And he said, and the worst people are the khatibs, the misqa, khatib misqa, which is a really powerful orator, because this is a time of demagoguery. And so you have orators that rile people up and get them stirred up and get them agitated in an agitated time. And then people traveling to some place. So, and he said that this fitna would be amya mudrima. It would be like a blind, dark fitna. Tamuru mawr al-bahr. It'll be like waves of the ocean. لا يبقى بيت من العرب والعجم إلا ملأته ذلا وخوفا. There's no home of the Arabs or the non-Arabs except they're filled with this dhul and fear. تطيف بالشام وتغشى بالعراق. It'll be in Syria and it'll be in Iraq, covering Iraq. وتخبط بالجزيرة بيدها ورجلها, and it will have its hand and foot on the Arabian Peninsula. تعرك الأمة فيها عرك الأديم. The ummah will be pounded like the cloth, the leather cloth that's used to grind mill, like the millstone cloth. يشتد فيها البلاء حتى ينكر فيها المعروف. The tribulations will be so great that the ma'ruf won't be known. ويعرف فيها المنكر, and the munkar will be what's known. لا يستطيع أحد أن يقول مه. No one will be able to say stop, silence. ولا لا يرقعونها من ناحية إلا تفتقت من ناحية. Nobody will sew up one part of it except another part will be ripped open. يصبح الرجل فيها مؤمنا ويمسي كافرا. People will go to sleep believers and wake up kafirs. ولا ينجو منها إلا من دعا كدعاء الغرق في البحر. And the only people that will be saved are people that call the call of somebody who's drowning. So, Allahu A'lam if this applies to our time right now, but certainly sounds like it. So we're in a difficult time, and I think a lot of people are almost, I worked in a intensive care unit, and sometimes we had comatose patients there, and it was always very strange when you change their IV lines, or because you'd poke them or draw blood or do all that, and there was nothing, no response. So it's a very strange thing to see somebody really comatose. But the ummah seems to be really comatose. We just get afflicted with so much. And we need to call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We really do. This is a time we should be calling the dua of the gharq, somebody who's drowning. Because that's the dua of the one who Allah will always answer their prayer. Yujib dua al-mutar idha da'a wa yakshif as-su'. Allah will answer the prayer of the desperate, and He will remove their harm. And we should believe that. So, may Allah give you all a blessed time here. I hope you don't see anything that troubles you while you're here. I hope it's beneficial for all of you. So inshallah, use this time to learn as much as you can. Try to implement as much as you can while you're here from the sunnah to make things become habituated. And I'm going to talk about that a lot, about habit and inculcation of habit and things. So, جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك أكرمكم الله إن شاء الله. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. الحمد لله رب العالمين. My apologies, we were actually had a dinner with some people from the government, so we were in a sam'an wa ta'atan mode. So I apologize. Inshallah, we're going to go through as much of the Kitab al-Ilm as possible in the short time that we have. But before we do that, I think many of you are probably very familiar with Imam Al-Ghazali, but they say, عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمات. When you make mention of righteous people, there's mercy descends. So it's good to go over some of the salient features of his life one of the benefits of the tabaqat literature, which is the biographical literature of the scholars, is that it instills in you, first of all, a desire to be like them, because we're an imitative species. We tend to aspire to virtue by our nature, because we have a nature that aspires to virtue. So when you read about virtuous people, and then when you see them, it's unfortunately these people are far less common, but there still are some people within our ummah, fortunately, that have the qualities of the people that we've read about in the past, so that we know that they're real. Because sometimes the hagiography, there's a tradition that sometimes seems exaggerated when you read about it. You read about virtuous people that would pray Fajr with the wudu of Isha, and you think, is that really true? Or people that read the Quran every 3 days. But having personally known people like that, I know that it's possible, because I've seen it with my own eyes. Also, the photographic memories that some of these scholars had, I've seen in some of the teachers that I've had, memories that are just really astonishing. So, and then fortunately, unfortunately for us, he's not here this year, but in the past we've had Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, who in many ways is the Ghazali of his time, or the Shatibi of his time. He's certainly in his writings, and for some of you who might be fortunate enough to be able to read Arabic at that level, what's notable about his writing is, one, if you're accustomed to reading these scholars, he's writing in a very similar style and level of erudition, but he's also part of the conversation. And this is the conversation of the scholastic conversation that the ulama have over time. So ulama of the present, who are oceans of knowledge, have tended to read the best of what's gone in the past. So in any subject that they master, usul al-fiqh would be an example. Anybody who masters usul al-fiqh would have had to have read Imam al-Shafi'i's great work on usul al-fiqh, which begins the science of usul al-fiqh. And then they would have had to have read the great usuli scholars of Islam, most prominent amongst them, people like Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni, Imam al-Ghazali himself, Imam al-Qarafi, Imam al-Shatibi, and then you have the derivative scholars of usul, who aren't really original, don't have original contributions, but either abridge or modify something that's been written from another madhab in their own madhab, like Ibn Qudama in the Hanbali madhab. So I want to talk a little bit about Imam al-Ghazali and why he's important. About his life, he was born in 450 in the Hijrah calendar. And his life, surprisingly, was not long by today's standards. I'm actually older than he was when he died. But he was born into a very poor family. Some say his name is actually Ghazali with a shadda, from Ghazal, which is a carder of wool, which is what his father did. And others say it's from Ghazala, which was a small suburb of a village in the area of Tus, which is currently in northern Iran. He had a brother, Ahmad, who becomes a scholar and is more noted for his Sufism and his poetry than Imam al-Ghazali. But his father was a very simple man, but he loved the ulama. And he did not have the opportunity to study when he was young, but he really loved knowledge and he loved the ulama. And so he used to serve them. And because of that, some of the qawm say that he was was given these two great sons by Allah out of his love for the ulama, Allah, and his service towards them. He was given these sons, but he died when Imam Al-Ghazali was probably about 5 or 6 years old, and he left in his will a small amount of money that he had, and entrusted a very pious man in the village to take care of him and his brother. But that money ran out pretty quickly, and so the man who was caretaking for the two of them actually put them in a madrasa, because in those days you could go to a madrasa and you get bread and water and maybe some soup and lodgings. And so Imam Al-Ghazali was famous for saying, تعلمت العلم لغير الله فأبى أن يكون إلا لله. I learned knowledge for other than the sake of Allah, but knowledge refused to be other than for the sake of Allah. In other words, that he entered into the madrasa because he needed a place to live and eat as a young boy. But his knowledge ended up being for Allah, even if that wasn't the original intention. His first teacher, he had one Ibn al-Sarraj and Al-Razkari. These two were probably, he surpassed them pretty quickly. He then went, when he was still very young, he went to Nisapur, which was part of the Seljuk. And the Seljuks have different, like this was part of the Seljuk dynasty, but the Seljuks, there's the Seljuks of Central Asia, the Seljuks of Sham and Iraq, and then the Seljuks of Anatolia. So they're all from the same ethnic group, but they actually have different centers of their empire. And the Seljuks here were in power. They were a great dynasty, and they were great defenders of the Sunnah. And they were up against the occultic element of the Hermetic botany element that threatens orthodoxy. So they actually fought that element, and Imam Al-Ghazali aligns with them. But he went and he studied, before he reached 20, he went and he studied in Nisapur, and he had some great teachers, but he surpassed them all. There's no teacher that he had that he would eventually surpass him, including Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni. So when he was on his way back to Tus, he had spent I think 3 or 4 years studying, and he had what are called ta'liqats. These are like his notes, and he had them in a like a sack that he was carrying, and the caravan that he was in was seized by brigands, and he writes that one of the thieves took his mikhla, his bag, and he asked the head of the thieves if he would tell him to give him back his bag. And the man said, why should he do that? And he said, he asked him by Allah, he said, I just spent several years gathering all this knowledge, and if he takes it from me, it'll be a disaster for me. And the thief laughed at him, and he said, what kind of knowledge is that a thief like me could steal it from you? That's not real knowledge. If I could steal it, it's not knowledge. And Imam Al-Ghazali said, هذا منطق أنطقه الله ليرشد به أمري. This is a logic that God inspired him to speak in order to guide me. And then he gave him back his ta'liqat, and he went and he spent 3 years memorizing everything he had learned. And he swore that he would never study anything except that he would put it to memory. And he had a phenomenal memory, but this is what he did. So after this, he begins to study with Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain. And Imam al-Haramain is a very important figure in our tradition because he takes usul al-fiqh. And what's important to note is Imam al-Ghazali is considered by many a Sufi. The reality of it is that he was probably one of the most, I think, really striking critics of Sufism. If you read in the Ihya, if you read At-Tabyin, you will see that he's actually, in fact, he ends his book At-Tabyin on a chapter on the Sufis, and he said that, you know, of all these different groups he's been talking about, this is the most deluded group, are the Sufis. And he talks about the delusion of the Sufis in their belief that they're the elect, the delusion of the Sufis in the way they dress. They used the religion for worldly gain, that they were often filled with pride in their hearts. So he's very critical of Sufism, but there's an important distinction, and I'll get back to the usul in a second. There's an important distinction. The first part of our ummah, there was a group called the Sufiya. The Sufiya of this first period are accepted largely by the entire scholastic community of Muslims. And to say they're not is just a lie. So people like Abu Yazid al-Bustami, Ma'ruf al-Karhi, Sari al-Saqati, Imam al-Junaid, Imam al-Qushayri, Abu Nu'aym, many of these early people, Abu Talib al-Makki, all of these men are considered imams and recognized. Also, Sidi Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, Ibn Taymiyyah says that his miracles are mutawatira. They're factual statements, historical statements that should be considered fact. So this idea that tasawwuf is a bid'ah or an innovation in the religion is very alien to the tradition. To say that is alien. But that does not mean that everyone who calls himself a Sufi is somehow acceptable. On the contrary, there is a lot of deviance in tasawwuf and amongst the Sufis. And Imam al-Ghazali has been criticized in this late period by some for being a Sufi, as if that was some kind of a shameful thing. But that was not. And the laqab Sufi can be found amongst the muhaddithin. We have the Quran, the asanid of the Quran. You will find Sufis in the asanid of the Quran. You will find Sufis in the asanid of the hadith. So the religion has been transmitted by people that had that laqab and that were part of that tradition. And to deny that is really to deny something that is just undeniable. And Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah are used sometimes to attack tasawwuf. But the reality of it is that tasawwuf, even the name, is accepted by Ibn Taymiyyah, it's accepted by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah did a commentary on Abdullah al-Ansari's famous work, a Hanbali, great Hanbali scholar and a Sufi who wrote Manazir al-Sa'irin. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah did a commentary on that. He talks about fana and baqa, which are concepts that Imam Junaid articulated, but believed that they were Quranic concepts. So tasawwuf, like other sciences, emerged with technical terms. But Imam al-Ghazali is not primarily a Sufi, and this is important to remember. He is first and foremost, probably after Imam Shafi'i, the most important usuli scholar in the history of Islam. And the Mustasfa, his mankhul, when he wrote his mankhul, because he wrote several books in usul, when he wrote his mankhul, his teacher Imam Abu Ma'ali al-Juwayni said, "Dafani wa ana hayy." He buried me and I'm still alive. In other words, he surpassed me and my work. Imam al-Juwayni introduced the universals, the concept of that Islam came to preserve these 6 universals. There are 5 in his articulation. Some of the later scholars added a 6th, which is the ird. So حفظ دين ثم نفس مع النسب ومثله عقل وعرض قد وجب, like Imam Al-Laqani says, that the حفظ دين, preservation of the religion, preservation of the self, of life, preservation of wealth, property, preservation of family, preservation of the intellect, and preservation of dignity, human dignity. These are the 6 universals that Islam came to preserve and protect. And everything in our usul can be reduced to the protection of one of these 6 universals. There's no commandment or prohibition in Islam that's not rational. None. All of them are rational. Some of them have what's called hukum ta'abbudi. In other words, the rational meaning is not understood by us. For instance, why we pray 3 rak'ats at Maghrib and 2 at Subh. We don't know. But we know why we pray rak'ats. That's rational. So the other one, we believe there's a hikmah in it, but it's been hidden from us. Some people have explored those things, but generally there's nothing in our tradition that would be definitive. So, but what Imam Al-Ghazali does in usul, and I once asked Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, who is, I think, and it's not my opinion, but the opinion of people far more worthy of me to assess this amongst usuli scholars, that he is the preeminent usuli scholar of our time. And his books are clear indications of that. Amari al-Dilalat, the Mashahid min al-Maqasid, his book on Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, Maqasid al-Sharia. He's written several books in usul that are not just repeating things that have been said many, many times before, but he's actually doing 2 things. He's taking from the tradition the best of what's gone in the past, but then he's also having his own tarjihats and his own original insights into things. So he's in that way, really a mujaddid of usul al-fiqh. But I asked him once that if he could only have one book of usul from all the books that have been written, which one would he take? And he said Al-Mustasfa of Imam Al-Ghazali. What's interesting, especially for some of the modern Hanbalis that attack Imam Al-Ghazali, is that the most important Hanbali text that's studied by students of the Hanbali madhab is called Rawdat al-Nadhir, which is Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi's famous book. It's studied in Saudi Arabia now and in Medina. And that is basically an abridgment of the Mustasfa. So what makes Imam Al-Ghazali unique? There's a few things that he does in usul al-fiqh. First of all, he is the first usuli scholar to put logic as a propedeutic science, in other words, an introductory science to the study of usul al-fiqh. Some people find this odious and actually blame him for this. But one of the great scholars of this period who taught in Medina and wrote a book called Adwa al-Bayan, which is Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti, one of the great scholars that was produced by the land of Mauritania. He taught many, many years in Medina. And because some of the ulama, or most of the ulama there, actually prohibited or considered logic prohibited, because he felt it was so important as a subject, and because they wouldn't permit him to teach it, he wrote a book on logic and just changed all the names. And they used that book at the university in Medina. It was basically just a book on logic, but he just changed all the names and called it Adab al-Bahth wal Munadara. He didn't call it mantiq, but it's basically logic. So Imam Al-Ghazali introduced logic. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book, Radd ala al-Mantiqiyin, which is called Refutation of the Logicians. And Ibn Taymiyyah had a problem with logic, but he did not have a problem. What he had a problem with was the metaphysics of logic. Although he criticizes other aspects of logic, and it's a 2-volume book. It's been translated into English by Wa'il al-Hallaq, at least the abridgment that Imam Suyuti did. Imam Suyuti was also somebody who attacked the science of logic. I have a suspicion his logic teacher stole a book from him and attributed it to himself. When he was 17 years old, he was very upset about it. It was a book he wrote in usul, and I have a little bit of a suspicion that might have left a bitter taste in him about logic. The idea that logic is a bid'ah is really absurd, because logic, we all use logic, either poorly or well, but we're logicians. Every human being is a logician, because we're all reasoning. There's reasons why we do things. In the same way, we're all grammarians. We're either poor grammarians or we're using grammar well. But everybody is using grammar, like the man in The Bourgeois Gentleman, I think, who's amazed that he's been speaking prose all his life, right? When the man explains to him the difference between prose and poetry, that people don't know what they're doing because they don't have names for it. But we're all using predicates and adverbs and adjectives. We all have syntax. We use it well or we use it poorly. If we've studied grammar, or if we're in a country where standard language is usually grammatically correct. The United States, generally, the standard language is reasonably good. In classes in England, it's better, but Americans use poor grammar all the time. There's an argument amongst linguists that there's no such thing as poor grammar, it's just what people speak. But those are people that say that are relativists, and really, in the end, they're nihilists, because rules are important, and we can't speak table, walk, night, late, come, why not? If I start talking like that, you're not going to understand anything I say. So there's a reason why we speak logically, grammatically, and those of us who speak rhetorically effectively, we speak persuasively. So these are all important sciences that were studied. And so what Imam Al-Ghazali understood, Ibn Taymiyyah in his Radd ala al-Mantiqiyin says that al-Mantiq لا يفيد يستغني عنه الذكي ولا يفيد الغبي, that a really intelligent person doesn't need it, and it won't benefit a stupid person because it's too difficult. Well, that's nice for, the bell curve, all those people that are over in the standard deviation over here, and then those over here. But all the people in the middle that it's beneficial for, he's forgetting all those people. So it's true. Sahaba did not know tasawwurat and tasdiqat and qiyas. They didn't know syllogisms, but they used them, and the Prophet used them. And Imam Al-Ghazali wrote a book called Qistas al-Mustaqim, proving Ibn Taymiyyah says that Abu Hamid يدعي أنه تعلم المنطق من القرآن والحقيقة أنه تعلمه من Ibn Sina. He claims that he learned logic from the Quran, but the truth is he learned it from Ibn Sina. But if you read his book Qistas al-Mustaqim, he shows you that the Quran is using syllogisms. And there have been over 30 syllogisms identified in the Quran, usually enthymemes. And one of the things he shows is that they're the 5 most important, the golden syllogisms are used in the Quran. And so the prophets used logic. And when they reasoned, they're reasoning with logic. And the Quran is speaking to us rationally. The Quran is telling us to look, to reflect, to think, to use our aql. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ الَّذِينَ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Those who reflect, those who think. So he felt logic was very important, and he said that the early people didn't need it in the same way they didn't need grammar, because Umar radiallahu anhu did not need to know the 22 mansubats, because he didn't make mistakes in his grammar. He didn't need to know the 11 marfu'at. He didn't need to know the 3 majrurat. He knew those. He knew them sariqatan, like the Arabs said, لَسْتُ بِنَحْوِيًّا يُلُوكُ لِسَانُهُ وَلَكِنْ سَلَقِيٌّ أَقُولُ فَأُعْرِبُ. I'm not a grammarian who stammers as he speaks, trying not to make mistakes. He said, I'm saliqi, I'm a pure Arab that speaks and it's correct. And this is the way the early people were. So they didn't need grammar. They didn't need logic because they had it by fitrah. And the Prophet uses qiyas many times. In the hadith, he uses analogical reasoning, which Ibn Taymiyyah did accept as the reasoning of the fuqaha. He accepted analogical reasoning. He had a problem with deductive reasoning because he didn't believe in universals, and he was really the first nominalist, as far as I can tell, in history. I mean, there's a debate about Boethius and Porphyry because they only indicate that there's a problem with universals. But Ibn Taymiyyah was clearly had a problem with the concept of universals. And there's reasons for that also. And to be fair to him, in many ways, he was attempting to defend the tradition from the onslaught of very dangerous Greek ideas and dangerous occultic ideas. So Imam Al-Ghazali, it's important to remember that he introduces logic as being central to our tradition. And after Ghazali, logic becomes one of the primary studies in the madrasa tradition. This is something that some of the modern, whatever you want to call them, ideologues or critics of Al-Ghazali really have a problem with. And there's people that like to purify Islam, do some type of ethnic cleansing of Hellenistic thought from the Islamic tradition. But the truth is, the Prophet said, Al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. And he said, and it's attributed to him, and Ibn Abd al-Barr, who was called Hafidh al-Maghrib, one of the greatest muhaddithin in the history of Islam. He quotes this hadith, and the meaning is true, but Al-Hafidh Ibn Abd al-Barr doesn't suggest that it's not from the Prophet ﷺ, but he said, "Utub al-ilm walaw fi as-Sin," seek knowledge even unto China. So wherever knowledge is, we benefit from it. And the Muslims benefited greatly from Aristotle. Ibn Sina, Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah said, Abu Hamid shariba shifa famarida. He drank the shifa. That was the book of Ibn Sina. He said he drank the shifa and he got sick from it. Shifa means a healing. But my response to that is shariba shifa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala razaqahu ladhatuhu wa abqa fihi quwwatuhu wa adhaba anhu adahu. That Allah let him taste the delight of it, preserved in him what was strength from it, and let him reject what was harmful from it. And he was capable of doing that. The Shifa is an amazing work. And Ibn Sina is a mafkhara of the ummah. That our ummah could produce an intellect like that is a proof of Islam. It's the thamra of this religion that it produced intellects like that. It doesn't mean he didn't have mistakes. He had mistakes. He had some very serious mistakes, but he was one of the most phenomenal intellects in human history, recognized by Europeans. Avicenna is part of the European tradition. He has a massive influence on St. Thomas Aquinas. He introduced the concept, the Kalam cosmological argument is basically from Ibn Sina, and that is the last argument standing for the proof of the existence of God, a rational proof. I mean, that's his proof. So he was a brilliant man. It doesn't mean he didn't have mistakes, but Imam al-Ghazali benefited from him, but he also refuted him. And he wrote a book called Maqasid al-Falasifa, which was to clarify what philosophers meant. But then he followed that up with a second book, Tahafut al-Falasifa, which is the incoherence of the philosophers, and showed the problems. One of the things that philosophers believed, they had three main problems which he considered kufr, and then they had 17 other problems that he considered bid'ah, muharrama, But the kufr involved that God was coexistent with the cosmos, and this is a Greek belief, that the cosmos always existed, and God orders it. And then also that God didn't know universals, which is a very, very sophisticated problem that is superficially understood by a lot of people, that when they hear that, they don't understand what they were actually trying to do with that. But the refutation of that he knows the juz'iyat, is the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And then finally, that they did not believe in the resurrection of the body, the ba'ath al-ajsad. So these were the three things he considered kufr that were in their tradition. But as far as we know, Ibn Sina was a Hanafi, and those are the indications that he died as a Muslim. But what's in his book is he took Greek thought and attempted to Islamicize it, and was not successful in certain aspects, and in other aspects he was, especially in the logic. So, and he had his own original contributions to logic. But Imam Al-Ghazali, that really is the area that, and then in furu', he was a master of the Shafi'i madhab. He was an absolute genius in fiqh. He was a master of the aqidah, and some of his points in aqidah are original, and his contributions are original. Where he was admittedly weak, and he says this, is that he was not a muhaddith. Towards the end of his life, all he was reading was hadith. He was studying Al-Bukhari and Muslim in particular, and Ibn Taymiyyah said that that's how he died, with the book and the sunnah. But that's also how he lived. He was also a master of ethics. His book, Mizan al-Amal, is a very important book. It's the aslama of the akhlaq of Ibn Miskawayh. Raghib al-Isfahani is a marhala. He's like a barzakh between the Hellenistic thought of Ibn Miskawayh and his akhlaq. And he wrote Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, which is basically Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. And then Raghib al-Isfahani writes Adh-Dhari'a ila Makarim al-Shari'a, and introduces really a Quranic foundation for ethics. But Imam Al-Ghazali then does Mizan al-Amal, which is very important work. And then finally, what he did is he understood something about the religion that probably wasn't seen in the way that he saw it. Tasawwuf before Imam al-Ghazali was defended by people like Abu Talib al-Makki, al-Kalabadi. Ta'arruf ila Madhhab al-Tasawwuf is a very famous early work. Ibn Sarraj was a very important scholar of Tasawwuf. Al-Muhasibi, very important. But what all of the previous people before Ghazali, Imam al-Qushayri, preeminent amongst them, the Risala al-Qushayriya is a very important work. What they tried to show, that Tasawwuf was 1/3 of Islam, that it was ihsan, maqam al-ihsan, and that you had Islam, Iman, ihsan. And they wanted to show that this is what Islam is. Ihsan is the third dimension, and it's what became known as Tasawwuf. What Imam al-Ghazali did was he really showed that it was deeper than that. That Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, all of them, in other words, really the entire religion in essence is a spiritual truth. That everything we do has spiritual meaning. Zakat is a spiritual practice. Hajj is a spiritual practice. Your belief is much deeper than simply rote memorization of 20 attributes. That there is a spiritual dimension to Iman that is much deeper. And this is what he did in his Ihya. What he did was he showed that the entire religion is infused with meaning. And that if you divorce it from this, you take the ruh out of the body. You take the spirit out of the body, and what you have is something dead. And so this is really at the root of his message, that if we lose sight of this, that everything that you are doing is in preparation for this immense meeting And this meeting is the single most important event in your entire purpose and existence. The reason you have been created is this meeting with your Lord. And it's going to happen. And just as Moses was promised 40 nights, he was given 40 days to prepare for this meeting. Imam Al-Ghazali wrote 40 books. And the first book is the book of knowledge, because that is your provision on the journey. If you don't have that, you can't make the journey. You will die before you get to your destination. And the last book is the book of death, because that's the destination. The 20th book, which is the heart of the Ihya, is the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ, because that is the heart of the affair, is to be on the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, in his akhlaq, in his behavior. So this is really at the root of Imam Al-Ghazali's message, is to give ihya to these ulum, to revive them by putting the ruh back into them. He felt that the scholars had desiccated these traditions, that they had deracinated them of their essence, which was the spiritual truths behind all of these sciences. That in the end, they're all vehicles to know your Lord. And that's why it's such an important work. Does he have mistakes? He's human. But his mistakes are other people's virtues. So those people that attack Imam Al-Ghazali are really fools. Al-Qafilatu tasri wal-kirabu ta'wi. He's one of the greatest fruits of this tradition. He's recognized even outside of the faith. People recognize him. St. Thomas Aquinas quotes him as one of his sources. You can see direct lifting in the Summa Theologica of some of Imam Al-Ghazali's writings. So, alhamdulillah. Anyway. Any questions? How did individuals of earlier times manage to master so many science and disciplines? It's a very good question that I've pondered a lot. Fakhruddin al-Razi says in the introduction to his tafsir, he says that I know that what I know could not be learned in one lifetime. So, these people were given gifts from God. This divine infusion. The Prophet, when Hassan ibn Thabit used to do the hijah of the mushrikeen, he said, Ahju wa ayyadak Allah bi ruh al-Qudus. Speak your poetry against them, and may God strengthen you with the Holy Spirit. So the Ruh al-Qudus is real, the angels are real. These people have Malakani inspiration, they have Ilham. Ahmed bin Idris, one of the great scholars of the 19th century, if he wanted an ayah of Quran, he looked in his right palm. If he wanted a hadith, he used to look in his left palm. We have Palm Pilot now, so that's a different type of Palm Pilot. Imam Shafi, when he studied with Imam Malik, he used to do this. He was only 15, and Imam Malik, it was bothering him. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm too poor to afford ink and paper, so this is the way I memorize." He said, how do you do that? He said, "Well, I write it in my palm and then I remember it." He said, "Let me hear what I just recited to you." And he recited it back verbatim. And Imam Malik was very impressed with him. And he told him to have taqwa. And he said, you're going to have an affair. Inna laka sha'na. You're going to be somebody. So have taqwa. But that was Imam Shafi'i. He said that once he saw the wind lifted the dress of a woman, and his eye lingered longer than it should have. And when he got back, he used to memorize the lawh with one reading, and it was taking him more than one reading. So he went and he said, "Shakawtu ila waki'i su'a hifdhi, farshadani bi tark al-ma'asi, wa qala inna al-ilma nurun, وَنُورُ اللَّهِ لَا يُهْدَى لِعَاصِي. He said, I complained to Waki' about my bad memory. And so he told me, don't disobey your Lord, because knowledge is a light, and the light is not guided to disobedient ones. So I know my own teachers mastered many, many sciences. So I know part of it is really hard work and himmah, but another aspect is tawfiq from Allah, retentive memory, insights. Those are all gifts. But I mean, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, his Muhammad Saddam Wud Shayn was his teacher in Arabic. And he said he doesn't think that Sibawi was more knowledgeable in Arabic than Muhammad Saddam Wud Shayn. Muhammad Saddam Wud Shayn, Shaykh Abdullah studied with him. He wrote 1,000 lines on the muthallathat, which are the words in Arabic that can have three different ways of, three different diacritical marks on them, like jaddu, jiddu, and juddu. So that's a muthallath, because each one means something different. So he wrote 1,000-line poetry on all the words that have that, which Shaykh Abdullah studied with him. In Arabic, he learned the Alfiya, which is 1,000 lines, with the shawahid that goes with that. And then he learned 3,000 lines of the ihmirar on top of that, which are all the additions. And even his own teacher, Muhammad Saddam Wud Shayn, corrected Ibn Malik in different places in the Alfiya, showing that his opinion was a weaker opinion. And that's just in the Arabic language. One of the scholars that I met knew the Qamus of Al-Fayruz Abadi, several thousand-page book by heart, could quote any page. So Shaykh Abdullah learned the 10 qira'ats. He memorized the Shatibiya. He knows the 10 qira'ats. He's taught tafsir for many years. There's no word in the Quran that he doesn't know the meaning of. The tafsir of Asbab al-Nuzul. In Usul, he mastered the works of Imam Shatibi, of Imam al-Qarafi, and of Imam Al-Ghazali. And then in Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. In Furu', which are the branches, because Usul are the Dalail al-Ijmaliyah, and then the Furu' are the Dalail al-Tafsiliyah. In the Furu' he versified the book of Ibn Rushd, which is Bidayat al-Mujtahid. So he versified several thousand lines of poetry so that he would memorize the dalils from the other madhabs. So that's somebody that I studied with and know personally. So unfortunately, we're losing, these people are dying off, and may Allah preserve him, give him a long life. But we had great scholars in our ummah for centuries. And this is one of the dangers. That's why some of the young people need to turn off the Facebooks and turn off all this stuff and really try to learn this knowledge and take it seriously, because يَحْمِلُ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ مِنْ كُلِّ قَرْنٍ عُدُولُهُ. You know, that this knowledge is carried in each generation by upright people. You know, the adl is, they have to be upright. So وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have taqwa. Allah teaches, even though that's not a jumla shartiyah. The meaning is, you know, man amila bima alima awrathu Allahu ilma ma lam ya'lam. Whoever acts according to his knowledge, God will give him knowledge that he didn't know. And there's ilm ladunni, there's kasbi and wahbi. So there's kasbi knowledge, and then there's wahbi knowledge. Kasbi knowledge is earned and acquired, but wahbi knowledge is given, and it's given because of the kasb, because of the ikhlas, these things. It was mentioned yesterday that the sunnah of helplessness is to accept your situation. What does this mean in terms of both one's physical and spiritual states and actions? How far do we keep sinning to change our, striving to change our situation if it appears that that is what Allah has decreed? You know, this is probably better dealt with in your Aqidah class with Ustad Omar, because this is about qadar and ikhtiyar, about choice, and certain things are by aqdar, and then certain things are by ikhtiyar. And hikmah is knowing which is which. You know, the famous prayer that, you know, God, give me the ability to accept the things I can't change, to change the things that I can, and to give me the wisdom to see the difference. It's a nice prayer, but that's pretty much it. It's hikmah. It's knowing that takes hikmah to know that difference. And I'm going to get into that when we talk about in the Kitab al-Ilm about what hikmah is, because that's one of the things that's lacking. Imam Al-Ghazali has the 3 souls, and inshallah we'll talk about this more. But he's got the pig soul, the dog soul, and the sage soul. And right now in our ummah, too many of us have the quwwa al-shahwaniyya and the quwwa al-ghadabiyya are the hakima. The rulers in our souls are the pig and the dog. And the ruler is supposed to be the sage, the aql. It's the hakim. And hakim and hikmah are related. So when you have control of yourself, that's when hikmah will kick in. But as long as you don't have control of yourself, you won't act accordingly. And the Prophet said, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ تَزْكِيَةً وَيُعَلِّمُهُمْ الْعِلْمَ الْكِتَابَةَ, the Quran, وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and how to apply the Quran, because the Sunnah is the practical application of the Quran. The Prophet was كَانَ خُلُقُ الْقُرْآنِ, so he was implementing the Quran. There are times when he got angry. There are times when he showed immense forbearance, because hikmah is knowing when to get angry and when not to get angry. If you don't have hikmah, you're just angry all the time. We've got Muslims walking around, they're just angry. They're just angry people. And sometimes they're not, they use the conditions of the world as an excuse to manifest their own personal pathology. They're just angry. And so, oh, well, Palestine's an opportunity for me to just express my already existing rage. If it wasn't Palestine, I'd find some other excuse for it. They're just not well. And there's a lot of people like that. So, like Aristotle said, that getting angry is easy, but wisdom is getting angry for the right reason, directed at the right source, with the right amount, at the right time, to the right degree. I mean, that's hikmah. So anger is not, Allah made us creatures that get angry for a hikmah. But He also said, لا تغضب, which means don't let your anger overcome your aql. Because himaya, which is protection, is related to hamas, which yatahammas is to get angry, to get enthusiastic about something, but usually it's related to anger. Hamasa is a quality of the Jahili Arabs. But hamaqa is what follows when you don't have the hikmah. They run amok, ahmaq. That's a Malay term that got into English, to run amok, because the Malays don't pronounce the H. Allah yubarak fikum. It's late. Assalamu alaikum.